So the younger you are when you experience these adverse childhood experiences, the more likelihood that that is going to result in a trauma effect. When we're children, we don't have the mental and cognitive capacity to be able to make sense of things in the same way we do as an adult. We don't have the defense mechanisms that we do as an adult as well. So if you experience trauma when you're younger, it's more likely that that's going to have some sort of impact on your brain and potentially an impact on your behavior in the future as well. So this is how the brain deals with trauma, and this is how trauma comes back to haunt you as an adult and how it links to anxiety. So as children, the most important thing is attachment. Our very survival depends on attachment. We need to feel that our caregivers are reliable sources of safety, love, and comfort. Now, if that isn't the case, that's too much for the child's brain to be able to comprehend and manage. Simply too much. A child cannot understand, cannot feel the emotional pain of believing that they are not safe or not loved. It's too much for the child's brain to cope with, so the brain protects the child. The brain kicks in and pushes down all of that emotional pain. What's essentially happening when the child doesn't get their survival needs met, when a child can't attach safely, when they don't get the love and support and care that they need, there is a stress response that's initiated in the brain. So they're taken into the world of fight or flight. But as a child, that's far too much for them to deal with. It's overwhelming. So the brain steps in and pushes all of that stress, all of that pain, pushes it down into their nervous systems and into their body to protect them. It's the only option. It would be too much. It would feel like a threat to their very survival otherwise. So the brain pushes all of that down. Now, the only way that a child can continue, the only way that a child can carry on with life is that pain, that trauma part, it has to be compartmentalized. It has to be contained and managed. So there's almost like an internal splitting that goes on inside the brain where that trauma part has to be contained and it has to be buried because the child needs to get on with life, needs to go to school, needs to make friends, needs to do all the things that a child should do. So that part needs to be buried, it needs to be hidden. And then what happens, often many years later as an adult, is that part will re-emerge again. That part will step in the driver's seat. And there are many ways that this can happen. But what often happens is you'll find yourself reacting disproportionately in situations. So something happens, whatever that might be, you respond to that particular event, the undesired event, whatever it may be, but it feels that the emotional magnitude is disproportionate. And the reason that is your nervous system is remembering what happened. It's not something that happens consciously. The mind forgets things, but it's the body, the nervous system, that remembers everything. Now, even though this part is hidden, it doesn't mean it's vanished. It hasn't disappeared. It's just been buried. But it can still cause dysregulation in the body. It can still cause physical and mental symptoms. Takes a lot of energy to be able to keep that part buried, and it's not going to be buried all the time. Sometimes it will come up, and when it does, you can experience it as anxiety, as hypervigilance is another one as well. Hypervigilance is this increased awareness and increased perception of threat as well. So you feel ramped up, you feel that there's threat, there's danger, even when it's not there. And you might have experienced this if you suffer with anxiety quite often. So often this hypervigilance is something that's living in your nervous system from events that happened many years ago, but all it takes is certain environmental conditions and that part will re-emerge again. And it's not that it needs to remind you of that situation. It's not that something happens as an adult and then you think, oh, this reminds me of when I was a child. Sometimes that may happen, but more often than not, it's something that's happening outside of your conscious awareness. Your body will remember things. So something will happen. You will feel a strong emotional and often physical reaction as well, because your brain is remembering what happened. And the event in question that's caused this as an adult does not need to be similar in any way to the childhood event, but it probably contains certain ingredients, and these are those certain ingredients. Trauma always includes the experience of feeling trapped, feeling helpless, feeling powerless, and feeling that you have no control in this situation. That would have been what the child part of you would have experienced, but it would have been too much for him or her to deal with, so the brain automatically protected him and shut it down. But it comes up again, doesn't it? In any situation where something has happened and you feel powerless, you feel helpless, you feel you have no control, and that part will re-emerge and will sit in the driver's seat again. And then, strange as it may sound, for all intents and purposes, in those moments, at that time, you're a child again. And to some of you, that might feel strange, whereas to others, that might kind of make sense to you. How many times have you experienced anxiety where you also feel small, or you feel vulnerable, or you feel like a child again? You feel you don't have the resources to protect yourself. You feel small. You feel that you're not an adult anymore. So many of my clients have shared this experience. I don't really feel like an adult at these times. I feel like a child in an adult's body. And that's very much what's happening. So the child part will re-emerge, and when it does, you're reminded of those things that happened to you. So you're responding not just to the event in question as an adult, but you're also responding to those childhood experiences as well. And you may not consciously remember any of it, but your body will. You'll feel the sensations of tension in your body that remind you of what happens. There's a very famous book in my field called The Body Keeps the Score, and that's exactly what happens with trauma. Your body remembers. Your body tells you that this reminds me of this bad thing that happened that I haven't processed yet. So often anxiety will be stubborn to treatment, stubborn to traditional forms of treatment, if there is unresolved trauma. And you can function pretty well with these childhood events. You can keep that part of you hidden and compartmentalized, and on the whole function very well. But it takes energy to do that. It can be tiring. And also all it can take is a certain situation where those ingredients are there, and then you feel overwhelmed again. It takes you right back. You feel overwhelmed, you feel helpless, and you feel powerless. Now, there are various ways that you can treat trauma. Trauma treatment has come on in leaps and bounds over recent years. A lot of the techniques tend to be techniques that are somatic techniques, to do with the body as much as the brain as well. You can't think yourself out of trauma. It's the deeper parts of the brain that are affected with trauma. So things like EMDR, which I'll talk about more in another video, and hypnosis can be particularly useful tools because they bypass the prefrontal cortex and they go deeper into the emotional brain, the limbic system, and the brainstem, the survival responses. So with trauma, talk therapy alone is not enough. You need specific strategies. You need to go deeper. Often when we talk about childhood trauma, we refer to the deepest wound. Now, the deepest wound as a child is feeling unlovable. And many people, many adults with low self-esteem, with poor self-worth, often that can be traced back to these early childhood experiences of not feeling enough. Now, if that happens as a child, your sense of self is not able to develop fully. And let me explain what I mean by that. So if as a child you learn that I am not lovable, and what I mean by that is, although that may not actually be happening, a child's brain is very black and white. Children tend to personalize everything. So if their needs aren't getting met, they can't do what an adult can do and say, well, the problem's not with me, the problem's with my parents, my caregivers. A child will personalize it. A child will make sense of it and protect their attachment relationship with their parents by having this compensatory belief, I'm the problem. There's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable. And if that's what they believe, then they learn to create a version of themselves that is more acceptable to their parents. So not only do they bury the trauma and the emotional pain, but in essence, they bury themselves. They learn that I am not okay as I am, so I need to learn who I need to be in order to get the love, approval, and acceptance of my parents. Meanwhile, abandoning what we often refer to as their authentic selves. And this is the deepest wound because people don't have a sense of who they are. I've had so many people come to see me in therapy. When we get under the surface of things a little bit, they discover that they don't really know who they are. And the reason that is because they had to bury their real selves in order to survive, in order to function, in order to be accepted, in order to get the scraps of love that came their way. They had to be able to do this. Now, I'll share with you that I know from personal experience what that's like. And it's not something that's very pleasant. And there is a constant hum of anxiety and hypervigilance and feeling like you're going to be found out at any moment. This is where imposter syndrome links in as well, if any of you have experienced that. So that is just some of what happens when we experience trauma. That child part, frozen in time, re-emerges in certain situations, and then we need specific treatment. Essentially, what we need to do is we need to integrate that child part back into us so that we are whole again, rather than having this splitting between the traumatized part and the part that has to carry on. Now, I use hypnosis for this, and I use inner child work for this. Now, that may sound a bit strange, but essentially what you end up doing is visiting this child part of you. And this child part of you, again, strange as it may sound, it's like a separate person. It's a sub-personality inside of you. Now, you're the only one in the world that knows what that part of you has experienced. And when you visit that part of you in hypnosis, that part of you may be frightened. He or she might be angry. She might not trust you. And all of that makes sense, doesn't it? Because the people that were meant to love her and protect her unconditionally didn't. So when you go to her, you're going to need to build up her trust. You're going to need to build a relationship of trust. You need to show her that you're trustworthy. You need to build and nurture that relationship. This is what inner child work looks like. This is what healing from trauma looks like. Forming that relationship, building and nurturing that relationship, the adult you and the child you, and healing that wound. It's very powerful, very beautiful work. It's a privilege to be able to do it, but it can be very emotionally charged. It's not something, as you can imagine, I jump straight into with patients. We need to spend a reasonable amount of time building up the resources so that they're able to cope with that, able to regulate their emotions, to regulate their nervous system so they're able to cope with it. But the next time you feel an overreaction to a situation, it could be that that is related to childhood experiences in the past. It could be the child part of you has re-emerged. And it's important to realize that when the child part of you does re-emerge and he's in the driver's seat, there is another part of you that is still available. The adult part of you hasn't vanished, it hasn't disappeared, it's still there, you still have access to it. So you can treat the child part of you as a separate person, a separate part. And healing from trauma is welcoming that child part back. Helping him or her to believe that you're trustworthy, showing him love, empathy, compassion. And this can be done in various ways. You might have dialogues with the child part of you. You might write letters to the child part of you. You might just sit with that child part of you and be close to that child part of you. There's not a structured rule book for inner child work. How I work with people varies depending on what that child part needs. So that's just a little bit of an overview of trauma. I'm sure we will come back to speak about trauma more in the future as well. But if your anxiety is persistent, if there is a hypervigilance, if you're looking for threats even when they're not there and it feels like you're doing that all of the time, if you're overreacting often, it could be that the child part of you is re-emerging. And then it's a case of being able to recognize, this is my child part, and be there for her. The reason that she has come up in the way she has is she's being reminded of what's happened. You need to reassure her that it's okay. You need to tell her it's over. What happened to her was wrong, but it's over now. And because it's over now, she's safe. And you can take her into safety so she no longer has to be frozen in time.